Black woman takes the stand, but the entire court freezes. When the FBI steps in, the morning air was sharp in Chicago, a city where power and corruption often walked hand in hand. Danielle Carter pulled her coat tighter around her as she approached the towering glass and steel structure of the Cook County Courthouse. The cold breeze carried the whispers of the city, but none were as harsh as the accusations hanging over her head. She took a deep breath, steeling herself against the stares that followed her inside. The news headlines had been merciless. Financial analyst caught in million-dollar embezzlement scheme, and former employee steals from CEO, claims innocence. Every article painted her as guilty before she even had the chance to prove the truth. The halls of the courthouse smelled of stale coffee and polished floors, but for Danielle, it reeked of injustice. She adjusted the strap of her handbag, walking with purpose even though every step felt heavier than the last. This courtroom was meant to be a place of truth, but all she saw was a battlefield, one where power, influence, and lies often crush the innocent. She paused outside courtroom 4B, hands trembling. Just a few months ago, she was a respected senior financial analyst at Hargrove Enterprises, one of the most prestigious real estate firms in the city. She had worked late nights, sacrificed weekends, and climbed the corporate ladder, thinking she had secured her place. Then everything came crashing down. It started with an email from the company's legal department requesting a routine audit. Danielle thought nothing of it until she noticed irregularities in the company's financials. Millions of dollars were being shuffled through shell accounts, and the numbers didn't add up. When she brought her concerns to her boss, Stephen Hargrove, the powerful billionaire CEO, he had dismissed her with a charming smile. But within a week, the tables turned. A police warrant, a public arrest. Hargrove had accused her of stealing $2 million from the company. The same man who had once called her his most trusted employee had now thrown her to the wolves. Danielle exhaled sharply, pushing open the heavy courtroom doors. Today she would take the stand. Today she would tell her truth. But what she didn't know was that the truth was about to explode in a way no one saw coming. Just about numbers on a spreadsheet, he said, his eyes scanning the jury with measured confidence. It's about a woman who did her job too well, a woman who uncovered the truth and was punished for it. Monica forced herself to remain still, her fingers pressing into her palms as David continued. My client, Monica Johnson, has dedicated years of her life to this company. She worked her way up through sheer determination, only to be accused of a crime she did not commit. The evidence will show that the real betrayal lies not with her, but with those who have used their power to silence her. The jury remained expressionless, their gazes shifting between David and the prosecutor. Monica had no idea if they believed her side of the story, but she knew the battle was just beginning. The prosecution wasted no time calling their first witness, Stephen Hargrove himself. Hargrove stood with practiced ease, adjusting his expensive suit before stepping into the witness box. He placed one hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth, though Monica doubted the concept of honesty had ever meant much to him. The prosecutor approached him with the air of someone who already knew the answers. Mr. Hargrove, he began, can you tell the jury when you first noticed the missing funds? Hargrove nodded solemnly, his face a picture of regret. It was during a routine internal audit. We trusted Monica with our most confidential financial matters, and when irregularities were found, it was devastating. We wanted to believe it was a mistake, until we traced the missing funds to accounts linked directly to her. Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Monica's nails dug into her palms. Lies, every word of it. David rose from his chair, his expression impassive. Mr. Hargrove, he said, approaching the stand, you claim these accounts were linked to my client. Can you explain exactly how you discovered this connection? Hargrove barely faltered. Our forensic accountants were able to follow the transactions. It was complex. She covered her tracks well. But in the end, the evidence spoke for itself. David nodded slowly, flipping open a folder. And yet, the forensic report we obtained, the same report submitted to the court as evidence, shows that those accounts were created using an executive login, a login that only senior leadership had access to. Hargrove's face twitched, but he quickly masked it with a tight smile. I wouldn't know the details. That's what my accountants were for. David didn't let up. And these accountants, do any of them still work for your company? Hargrove hesitated. Some have moved on. Moved on, David repeated, flipping another page. Or were let go once this case went public. Hargrove's jaw tightened, but before he could answer, a loud bang echoed as the courtroom doors swung open. All heads turned. A man in a crisp black suit strode inside, his badge glinting under the fluorescent lights. The emblem was unmistakable, FBI. The room fell into complete silence. Judge Ellison straightened, frowning. "Excuse me, sir. This is a court of law. Who are you, and why are you interrupting these proceedings?" The man stepped forward, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "Special Agent Ryan Matthews, FBI." He pulled a document from his coat and handed it to the judge. "Your Honor, we have obtained new evidence that directly contradicts the prosecution's claims. Effective immediately, we are issuing a federal warrant for the arrest of Stephen Hargrove." Atmosphere was just as suffocating. Monica took her seat beside David, her lawyer, who gave her a reassuring nod. "You ready?" he murmured under his breath. "As ready as I'll ever be," she replied, though her stomach twisted with nerves. Judge Ellison entered, and the courtroom rose in practiced silence. The gavel came down with a sharp crack. "Proceed," she instructed. The prosecution wasted no time resuming their attack. The forensic accountant hired by Hargrove's team took the stand, presenting a series of financial records purportedly linking Monica to the fraudulent transactions. David leaned toward Monica and whispered, "They're making their move. But don't worry, so are we." Monica swallowed hard, watching as the prosecutor paced before the jury. "This," the prosecutor declared, holding up a thick document, "is a record of every unauthorized transfer made from Hargrove Real Estate's accounts. These funds, over $2 million, were directed into offshore accounts created using Monica Johnson's credentials." Monica felt the jury's eyes turn toward her, and despite the heat creeping up her neck, she held her head high. David rose smoothly from his chair. "Your Honor, I'd like to cross-examine," he said. Judge Ellison gave a tight nod. "Proceed." David approached the accountant, flipping through a stack of his own documents. "You testified that the accounts in question were created using my client's credentials, correct?" "Yes," the accountant confirmed. David held up a sheet of paper. "And yet these logs indicate that the accounts were created using an executive access code, a code my client did not possess." A murmur ran through the courtroom. The accountant hesitated. "Well, it's possible," David cut him off. "Possible that someone else created these accounts and framed my client?" The prosecutor objected, but the damage was already done. The jury was paying attention now. Then came the moment that changed everything. The doors to the courtroom burst open. All heads turned as two men in black suits entered. They moved with deliberate authority, their badges glinting under the courtroom lights. Judge Ellison's eyes narrowed. "Who are you, and why are you interrupting this trial?" One of the men stepped forward. His voice was calm, but his words sent shockwaves through the room. "Special Agent Ryan Matthews, FBI. We are here to serve a federal warrant for the arrest of Stephen Hargrove." The courtroom froze. For the first time, Hargrove's confident smirk vanished. "On what grounds?" the prosecutor stammered. Matthews held up a file. "Fraud, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. New evidence has surfaced, revealing an elaborate scheme to embezzle millions and frame Monica Johnson for the crime." A collective gasp rippled through the spectators. Monica clutched the edge of the table, barely believing what she was hearing. "You can't be serious," Hargrove growled, his face twisting in fury. But the FBI agents weren't listening. They approached Hargrove, one pulling out a pair of cuffs. "Stephen Hargrove," Matthews announced, "you are under arrest." Asking, he was telling her. Monica hesitated for a moment before nodding. "All right. Where?" Agent Reed motioned toward a black SUV parked near the courthouse. "Somewhere private." Monica glanced back at the courthouse doors, where reporters and onlookers milled about, waiting for any sign of movement. With a sigh, she followed the agents to the vehicle, sliding into the back seat as the doors shut with a soft click. Inside, the air was tense. Agent Reed wasted no time. "Miss Johnson, we've been investigating Stephen Hargrove for months. We have reason to believe that he orchestrated the fraud and used you as a scapegoat." Monica's breath caught in her throat. "You mean?" You know I didn't do this? Reed nodded. We do, but proving it in a courtroom is another matter. Hargrove has influence, and he's buried the evidence well. We need your help. Monica swallowed hard. How? Agent Reed handed her a thin folder. Inside were documents, emails, transaction logs in her throat. Even in the midst of all this chaos, her son was thinking about her well-being. She let out a small chuckle, blinking back tears. I did, baby, I promise. Good, Tyler said with a satisfied sigh. Because you need to stay strong. You always tell me that when things get tough, we have to push through, right? Monica's grip on the phone tightened. Yes, sweetheart, that's right. Then you got this, Mom. I believe in you. Her breath hitched. If only he knew the weight of those words at this moment. She cleared her throat, forcing a smile into her voice. Thank you, Tyler. I love you so much. Love you too, Mom. I gotta go. Coach is calling us back for drills. See you later. As the call ended, Monica stared at her phone for a long moment. The fear in her chest was still there, but now there was something else too. Resolve. She turned, looking back at the courthouse behind her. Tomorrow she would return, not just as a woman fighting to clear her name, but as someone who now had the power to expose the real criminal. Stephen Hargrove thought he had won. He was wrong. The courtroom shifts. The next morning, Monica arrived earlier than usual. Her lawyer, David Carrington, was already there, pacing near the defense table. The weight of the previous day's events hung between them. You all right? He asked, scanning her face. Monica met his gaze with newfound determination. I need you to trust me today, she said. David frowned. What do you mean? Before she could answer, the bailiff called for everyone to rise. Judge Ellison entered the courtroom, her gavel striking the block. Court is now in session, she announced. Prosecution, you may continue. The lead prosecutor, looking confident, strode toward the jury. Your Honor, at this time, we'd like to call Stephen Hargrove to the stand. The courtroom murmured as Hargrove, with his usual air of superiority, made his way to the witness box. He adjusted his tie, flashing a composed smile, as if the outcome was already written in his favor. Monica glanced at the door. Any moment now. The prosecutor began his questioning, allowing Hargrove to paint himself as the victim, a betrayed businessman who had trusted the wrong employee. Monica listened in silence, her pulse steady, waiting for the perfect moment. Then just as Hargrove finished spinning his latest lie, the doors swung open. Gasps rippled through the courtroom as two men in dark suits walked in, their presence commanding immediate attention. David's eyes widened as he realized who they were. FBI agents. Judge Ellison looked up, clearly displeased by the interruption. What is the meaning of this? She demanded. Special Agent Marcus Reed stepped forward, his badge gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Your Honor, we need to speak with the court immediately. Hargrove's smirk vanished, his fingers clenched against the armrests of the witness stand. Judge Ellison frowned. About what, Agent Reed? The agent didn't take his eyes off Hargrove. New evidence has come to light. Stephen Hargrove is currently under federal investigation for financial crimes, including tax fraud and money laundering. We have obtained direct evidence that proves Monica Johnson was framed. The courtroom erupted. Reporters scrambled to grab their phones. Spectators whispered frantically, and even the prosecutor turned pale. Judge Ellison banged her gavel repeatedly. Order! But Monica wasn't looking at the judge. She was looking at Stephen Hargrove. For the first time, he looked afraid. Find that could strengthen our case? You contact me immediately. We're building an airtight case against him, but every detail matters. Monica exhaled slowly, the weight of the situation pressing down on her. And what happens if he finds out? Marcus didn't hesitate. Then we'll make sure he regrets it. The line went dead. Monica set the phone down, staring at the screen as if the words could materialize into something more tangible, something that made sense. Intimidation, threats, maybe worse. She had known Stephen Hargrove was corrupt, but this was something else. A knock on her door made her jump. Her heart slammed against her ribs as she approached the peephole. It was David. She let out a shaky breath before unlocking the door. You okay? David asked, stepping inside, his sharp gaze scanning her face. Yeah, Monica lied, gesturing toward the pile of documents on the table. Just reviewing everything. David studied her for a beat longer than necessary before nodding. Good, because tomorrow we take the stand. Are you ready? She wasn't, not even close, but she had no choice. I will be. The day everything changed. The next morning, the courtroom was even more packed than before. Cameras flashed outside, journalists huddled in corners, and tension hummed in the air like an electric current. Monica walked in with David at her side, her head high despite the storm brewing inside her. Stephen Hargrove sat at his table, as arrogant as ever, whispering something to his lawyer. Their eyes flickered toward Monica, and she knew. They were already planning their next move. The judge called the court to order. Defense, you may proceed with your witness. David stood. The defense calls Monica Johnson to the stand. Monica took a deep breath and walked forward. She had barely settled into the witness chair when the prosecutor rose. Objection, Your Honor. Given the nature of Miss Johnson's charges, I'd like to remind the court that her testimony is self-serving and should be weighed accordingly. Judge Ellison raised a brow. Overruled. Proceed, Mr. Carrington. David approached her with calm, steady steps. Monica, can you tell us in your own words how you first discovered the financial discrepancies at Hargrove Real Estate Group? Monica straightened. It started with a routine report. I noticed inconsistencies in the numbers, transactions that didn't align with our records. When I tried to trace them, I realized that money was being funneled into untraceable accounts. And when you brought this to Mr. Hargrove's attention, what was his response? He told me to drop it, she said, voice steady. He made it clear that asking questions would cost me my job. David nodded. And did you stop investigating? No. Why not? Because it was wrong. Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. The prosecutor's turn came quickly. Miss Johnson, he said, his tone dripping with condescension. Isn't it true that you were the one accessing restricted financial records? That you moved funds without authorization? No, she said firmly. I was investigating. For your own benefit, correct? Monica's jaw clenched. I was trying to find the truth. The prosecutor smirked. And yet the truth seems to point directly at you. The tension in the room thickened. The jury watched her, weighing her every word, her every breath. Then, the courtroom doors burst open. A wave of shock rolled through the crowd as Special Agent Marcus Reed strode in, flanked by 2 other FBI agents. All eyes turned toward him. David froze. Your Honor? Before anyone could react, Marcus pulled out a warrant. Your Honor, Marcus said, his voice a force of its own. The FBI has obtained irrefutable evidence that Stephen Hargrove is engaged in ongoing financial crimes, including money laundering, tax fraud, and falsified transactions. Gasps erupted. Stephen Hargrove shot to his feet. This is outrageous. You can't just barge in here. Marcus turned to him with a look that could crack stone. Stephen Hargrove, you are under arrest for financial fraud and obstruction of justice. The entire courtroom fell into stunned silence. Then, like a dam breaking, chaos erupted. Reporters scrambled to document every second. The judge pounded her gavel for order. Jurors whispered in shock. Monica sat frozen as 2 agents approached Hargrove, handcuffing him on the spot. The same man who had orchestrated her downfall. The same man who had framed her. Stephen Hargrove snarled as they read him his rights, twisting in their grasp. This is a mistake. She's the one who stole from me. Marcus didn't even look at him. He turned back to Judge Ellison. Your Honor, in light of this evidence, the FBI is requesting that all charges against Monica Johnson be immediately dropped. Monica felt her breath catch. Judge Ellison stared at the scene before her, expression unreadable. Then after a long pause, she nodded. Motion granted. It was over. Monica's vision blurred as relief crashed over her. She was free. As Stephen Hargrove was dragged out of the courtroom in cuffs, his empire crumbling around him, Monica felt something she hadn't in a long time. Vindication. She turned toward Marcus, her voice barely above a whisper. Thank you. Marcus gave her a small nod. You fought for the truth, Miss Johnson. That's what made the difference. And as she stepped down from the witness stand, walking past the stunned faces of jurors and reporters alike, she finally understood. She had won. Missing pieces, the moments that hadn't made sense, the subtle way Hargrove had dismissed certain invoices, the random offshore accounts that never lined up with the company's declared assets, the way the numbers had always been a little too perfect, until she had started asking questions. A knock on the door startled her out of her thoughts. She hesitated before getting up, her pulse quickening as she peeked through the peephole. It was David. She exhaled, unlocking the door. "We need to go over today's strategy," he said, stepping inside, shaking off the rain. He set his briefcase on the table, his expression serious. "How are you holding up?" Monica sighed, running a hand through her curls. "I don't know. Every time I think we're getting ahead, something reminds me how powerful Hargrove is." David nodded. "He's powerful, but he's not invincible." He glanced at the papers scattered across the table. "Anything new?" Monica hesitated, then picked up one of the older reports she had saved. "I keep thinking about this. There were payments marked under consulting fees, but the accounts they were wired to didn't match any of our contractors. It was one of the first things that made me suspicious." David's eyes scanned the document, his brow furrowing. "These transactions, they look like classic shell company laundering schemes. If we can prove this, it's not just fraud. It's federal." Monica's stomach twisted. "That means we're not just dealing with corporate corruption, we're dealing with criminal operations on a whole new level." David nodded grimly. "It also means this case is bigger than we thought." Back in the courtroom, Monica sat at the defense table, her pulse steady but her mind racing. Across the aisle, Hargrove appeared relaxed, but she caught the way his lawyer whispered something into his ear, his jaw tightening slightly. He was nervous. The prosecution called another witness, a forensic accountant who had reviewed the company's books. She spoke about the patterns of fraudulent transactions and how the missing money was funneled into different accounts. "Miss Johnson was the only employee with full access to these records," the prosecutor said, pacing. "Doesn't it stand to reason that she orchestrated this fraud?" The accountant hesitated. "The transactions were processed under her access credentials, yes, but the structure of the scheme suggests something more sophisticated than a single individual moving funds for personal gain." David stood. "Are you saying this operation required more than one person?" The accountant nodded. "Yes, and likely someone with a much higher level of control over financial decision-making." The jury murmured, shifting in their seats. David pressed on. "And in your professional opinion, could Miss Johnson have pulled this off alone?" The witness hesitated before answering. "Number the scale of this requires multiple authorizations." David nodded. "No further questions?" Monica exhaled slowly. That was another crack in the prosecution's case. As they recessed for lunch, she stepped into the hallway to clear her head. That's when she saw him, a man in a dark suit standing near the elevators. Watching her, her stomach flipped. He wasn't one of the usual reporters. Marcus had warned her. "Stay vigilant." She turned, heading toward David, when the man suddenly moved, straight toward Hargrove's lawyer. Monica's breath caught. He wasn't watching her. He was watching them. Before she could process what was happening, Marcus appeared at her side. "Keep walking," he murmured. Her heart pounded. "Who was that?" Marcus didn't answer immediately. Instead, he guided her toward the exit. Then in a low voice, he said, "You just saw the man pulling Hargrove's strings." The moment that changed everything. The afternoon session started like any other, until the doors flew open. FBI agents stormed into the courtroom. Gasps filled the room as Special Agent Marcus Reed stepped forward, flashing his badge. "Your Honor, the FBI is presenting newly obtained evidence regarding financial crimes orchestrated by Stephen Hargrove. We request an immediate halt to these proceedings and the dismissal of all charges against Monica Johnson." Chaos erupted. The judge slammed her gavel. "Order!" But Monica wasn't looking at the judge. She was looking at Hargrove. For the first time, he wasn't smirking. Two agents approached his table. "Stephen Hargrove, you're under arrest for conspiracy, financial fraud, and obstruction of justice." His lawyer shot to his feet. "This is outrageous. You can't just—" Marcus held up a document. "We have wire transfers, offshore accounts, and evidence that implicates not only Hargrove, but multiple associates in a large-scale embezzlement scheme." The prosecutor, the same man who had torn Monica apart on the stand, suddenly looked very pale. Judge Ellison's gaze was sharp. "And what does this mean for Miss Johnson?" Marcus turned to her. "It means she was framed." A stunned silence fell over the room. Then, "The motion to dismiss all charges against Miss Johnson is granted," Judge Ellison announced. It was over. Monica felt a rush of relief so intense she thought she might collapse. Hargrove was speechless as they handcuffed him. He looked at Monica, his mask of arrogance replaced by raw panic. "This isn't over," he hissed. Monica met his gaze, unshaken. "Oh, it is." Aftermath. The courtroom emptied, but Monica remained, trying to process what had just happened. David clapped a hand on her shoulder. "You did it." She shook her head. "We did it." Marcus approached. "You're free now, Monica. But this case is going to have ripple effects. The people who backed Hargrove won't go down quietly." Monica exhaled, looking around the room that had nearly been her downfall. "Then let's make sure they don't get back up." She walked out of the courthouse, the weight of injustice finally lifting from her shoulders. The sun had broken through the gray sky, warm on her skin. For the first time in months, she was free. Way to the restroom when she felt it, that prickling sensation of being watched. She slowed her pace, glancing discreetly over her shoulder. A man in a dark suit stood near the vending machines, seemingly uninterested, scrolling through his phone. But Monica knew better. He had been near the courthouse entrance that morning, and again during the recess yesterday. Her pulse quickened. She turned a corner, ducking into a side hallway, pressing her back against the wall. Heart pounding, she pulled out her phone and quickly typed a message to Marcus. "Someone's following me." Seconds later, her screen lit up with a response. "Stay put. I'm on my way." Monica forced herself to breathe evenly. Whoever this was, they were watching her for a reason, and that meant she was getting close to something someone didn't want her to find. An unraveling lie. Back in the courtroom, Calvin Merrow took the stand. His presence alone was enough to unsettle Hargrove's defense team. David wasted no time. "Mr. Merrow, can you tell us about the concerns you raised during your time at Hargrove Real Estate?" Calvin adjusted his glasses. "I was part of the internal auditing team. Over time, I started noticing discrepancies in financial reports, accounts that didn't match revenue streams, funds being transferred under vague categories. When I brought it up to management, I was told to stay in my lane." David nodded. "And did you take your concerns directly to Mr. Hargrove?" "I did," Calvin confirmed, his voice steady. "He told me I was overanalyzing and that everything was above board. But a week later, I was let go without explanation." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. David continued, "In your professional opinion, was there financial misconduct happening at the company?" Calvin nodded firmly. "Without a doubt." The prosecutor stood, adjusting his tie. "Mr. Merrow, is it true that after leaving Hargrove Real Estate, you filed a wrongful termination lawsuit against the company?" Calvin hesitated. "Yes, I did." The prosecutor turned to the jury, his tone dripping with doubt. "So, let's be clear. You have a personal vendetta against my client, isn't that right?" David stood immediately. "Objection. Leading the witness." The judge nodded. "Sustained. Keep your questions relevant." Monica watched as the prosecutor's jaw clenched. They were losing ground, and they knew it. But then, the doors to the courtroom swung open, and in walked Marcus Reed. He didn't walk to the gallery. He didn't take a seat. He strode straight to the judge's bench, a file in his hands, and leaned in to whisper something. A hush fell over the room. Judge Ellison's expression hardened as she read the document Marcus handed her. After a long pause, she turned to the defense. "Mr. Hargrove, I strongly advise you to have your legal counsel prepare a statement." David frowned. "Your Honor?" Judge Ellison set the file down. "This court has just received substantial evidence from a federal investigation regarding Stephen Hargrove's financial activities." A murmur spread through the courtroom like wildfire. Hargrove's smirk disappeared. Marcus cleared his throat and stepped forward. "Your Honor, the FBI has been conducting a separate investigation into Mr. Hargrove's dealings. New evidence has surfaced that directly contradicts the allegations against Miss Johnson. As of this moment, we are formally requesting that all charges against her be dropped." A collective gasp. Monica gripped the edge of the table, unable to breathe. The judge turned to the prosecution. "Counsel?" The prosecutor, flustered, shuffled through his notes before looking helplessly at Hargrove's defense team. They were whispering furiously among themselves. Judge Ellison sighed. "Given this new development, I see no grounds to continue these proceedings. The charges against Monica Johnson are hereby dismissed." The words hit Monica like a thunderclap. She was free. The fall of a giant. As Monica stepped outside, the courthouse was in chaos. Reporters swarmed. Cameras flashed. Hargrove was being led away in handcuffs. Marcus walked beside Monica, keeping her shielded from the media frenzy. "You okay?" She let out a breathless laugh. "I think so." David joined them. "You did it." Monica shook her head. "We did it." As she turned to leave, she caught sight of Hargrove being loaded into a black SUV. For the first time since this nightmare began, he looked afraid. Monica smiled. Justice had finally caught up with him, measured bursts. Was this just paranoia? Or was Hargrove beginning to retaliate? She forced herself to stay calm, making an unexpected turn onto a different street. The SUV followed. Her heart pounded. Reaching for her phone, she quickly dialed Marcus. "It's happening," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Where are you?" he asked immediately, his tone shifting to full alert. "Near Peachtree Avenue," she said, glancing in the mirror. "A black SUV has been following me since I left the courthouse." "Do not drive home," Marcus ordered. "Take a detour, head toward a public area. I'll send someone to intercept." Monica gritted her teeth, forcing herself to breathe. This was real. This was happening. She made a sharp right, heading toward a gas station with plenty of people around. The SUV hesitated at the intersection before speeding off in the opposite direction. Whoever was inside, they had decided not to be seen. To closing. In the next morning, Monica entered the courthouse with renewed caution. The trial had taken a dramatic turn, and the stakes had never been higher. As she approached the defense table, David leaned in. "You okay?" Monica nodded, though her pulse still raced from the events of the night before. Before she could say anything else, the doors to the courtroom opened, and in walked 3 federal agents, all dressed in black suits. Marcus Reed was among them. The entire courtroom fell silent. Judge Ellison frowned. "Agent Reed, I assume you have business here?" Marcus stepped forward. "Your Honor, I have an urgent matter that pertains directly to this case." The prosecutor rose, flustered. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular. This is a state trial." "Not anymore," Marcus cut in smoothly. He turned to Monica, his expression unreadable. "Miss Johnson," he said, his voice carrying through the courtroom, "I'd like to formally inform you that you are no longer the accused in this case." Gasps rippled through the room. Monica gripped the table. "What?" Judge Ellison's expression hardened. "Explain." Marcus stepped forward, holding up a document. "Your Honor, the FBI has gathered substantial evidence that the financial crimes in question were not committed by Miss Johnson, but by Stephen Hargrove. This morning, a federal warrant was issued for his arrest." The room exploded into chaos. Hargrove shot to his feet, his face red with rage. "This is ridiculous. I demand to speak with my attorneys." "You'll have plenty of time to do that," Marcus said as the agents closed in. "After we read you your rights." The courtroom watched in stunned silence as Stephen Hargrove, the man who had orchestrated Monica's downfall, was placed in handcuffs. David turned to Monica, a slow smile spreading across his face. "It's over." A new beginning. Monica stood outside the courthouse, the fresh air hitting her like a wave of relief. The reporters swarmed her, cameras flashing, microphones shoved in her direction. "Miss Johnson, how does it feel to have the charges dropped? What's next for you?" Monica took a deep breath, glancing at Marcus, who stood nearby, watching the scene unfold. "I think," she said slowly, "it feels like justice." Her phone buzzed. A message from Tyler. "Mom, I knew you'd win." She smiled, blinking away the tears. For the first time in what felt like forever, the weight had lifted. She was free. Him to falsify financial records when he refused, he was forced out quietly with a generous severance package and a non-disclosure agreement. Monica felt her pulse quicken. This was it. This could be the break they needed. The courtroom doors swung open and Judge Ellison entered, calling the session to order. David wasted no time. "Your Honor, the defense would like to call Thomas Braden to the stand." A murmur spread through the room as a tall, middle-aged man with graying hair stepped forward. Dressed in a modest suit, he walked with a stiff, uneasy gait, but his eyes held determination. Braden took his oath and sat down, glancing once at Hargrove, whose lips pressed into a thin line. "Mr. Braden," David began, "can you tell the court about your role at Hargrove Real Estate Group?" Braden cleared his throat. "I was a senior project manager, overseeing financial reports and investments. And during your time there, did you ever witness any unethical or illegal financial activity?" Braden hesitated, then exhaled sharply. "Yes." The courtroom fell silent. David leaned forward. "Can you elaborate?" Braden shifted, clasping his hands together. "I was instructed, by Stephen Hargrove himself, to alter financial statements. The goal was to make certain losses disappear, to create the illusion of stronger earnings. I refused." A gasp rippled through the audience. David nodded. "And what happened after that?" Braden's expression darkened. "Hargrove called me into his office. He told me that if I didn't cooperate, he'd make my life miserable. A few weeks later, I was suddenly let go. No explanation, just a generous severance and an NDA shoved in front of me." David turned toward the jury. "Mr. Braden, are you saying that Hargrove retaliated against you for refusing to participate in fraudulent financial activity?" Braden nodded. "Yes, and I have the emails to prove it." A collective gasp surged through the courtroom. Hargrove's legal team scrambled to object, but the damage had already been done. The final blow. During the lunch recess, Monica could barely keep up with the flood of developments. David was reviewing Braden's email records. The prosecutor looked rattled, and even Judge Ellison seemed more engaged. Then Marcus Reed appeared at the defense table, his face unreadable. "It's happening," he said in a low voice. Monica's stomach clenched. "What is?" Marcus exhaled. "The DOJ is moving in. Hargrove doesn't just have fraudulent accounts, he has offshore ties to criminal enterprises. That's federal jurisdiction now." Before Monica could process the implications, the doors slammed open. FBI agents poured into the courtroom. Judge Ellison's gavel slammed down. "What is the meaning of this?" A senior agent stepped forward, flashing his credentials. "Your Honor, Stephen Hargrove is under federal arrest for financial crimes, tax evasion, and conspiracy to commit fraud. We have a warrant." The courtroom erupted into chaos. Hargrove bolted up from his seat. "You can't do this." Two agents restrained him as the lead agent read his rights. Monica watched, her breath catching in her throat. It was over. The man who had framed her, destroyed her reputation, and tried to ruin her life, was now being led away in handcuffs. She turned to Marcus. This actually happened?" Marcus gave a small smile. "Justice takes time, Miss Johnson. But it always comes." Monica let out a shaky breath. Tyler's words echoed in her mind. "You're going to win." And she had. Hiding? The tension in the room was suffocating. Monica could feel the shift. The jury wasn't looking at her the same way anymore. Doubt had crept in. Hargrove's once unshakable confidence had cracked. His legal team scrambled, whispering frantically among themselves, likely realizing that the story they had carefully crafted was beginning to unravel. Then something even more unexpected happened. A stunning turn of events. As the court prepared for a brief recess, the side doors suddenly swung open. A group of federal agents entered, led by none other than Marcus Reed. Judge Ellison frowned. "What is the meaning of this?" Marcus approached the bench, flashing his badge. "Your Honor, we have an arrest warrant for Stephen Hargrove. He is under federal investigation for financial fraud, money laundering, and obstruction of justice." The room exploded into chaos. Monica felt her breath hitch. It was actually happening. Stephen Hargrove shot up from his seat, his face going red with fury. "This is outrageous! You can't just—" But before he could finish his sentence, two agents stepped forward, pulling his arms behind his back. The clank of handcuffs echoed through the silent courtroom. Hargrove turned, his eyes locking onto Monica. His glare held nothing but hatred. "This isn't over," he hissed. Monica didn't flinch. because for her it was. As the agents led Hargrove away, Judge Ellison turned to the jury. Given these new developments, the court will recess to determine the best course of action regarding the charges against Miss Johnson. Monica finally exhaled. She had fought for the truth, and today the truth had won. A new beginning hours later, as Monica stepped outside the courthouse, the cool afternoon air felt different, lighter. Reporters swarmed, but she ignored them, her eyes scanning the crowd until she found Tyler, standing on the steps with his grandmother. As soon as he saw her, he ran. She knelt, catching him in her arms, holding him tighter than she ever had before. "You did it, Mom," he whispered against her shoulder. Monica swallowed the lump in her throat. "We did it." She looked up, catching sight of Marcus Reed watching from a distance. He gave her a small, approving nod before disappearing into the sea of people. Monica didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain. She was free, and for the first time in a long time, she could finally breathe, on edge. Slowly she stood, her breath shallow as she moved toward the door. Peering through the peephole, her pulse spiked. A man in a dark suit stood outside, his posture rigid, his face shadowed by the dim hallway light. Monica's fingers hovered over the lock. Her instincts screamed at her to stay silent. Then the man spoke. "Miss Johnson, it's Marcus Reed. Open the door." Relief and hesitation warred inside her. She quickly unlatched the door, but kept the chain on, opening it just wide enough to see his face. "I need to speak with you," Marcus said, his tone clipped, urgent. Monica studied him. The same calm authority, the same piercing eyes, but this time there was something else. Tension. She nodded and unhooked the chain. "Come in." A shocking revelation. Marcus stepped inside, shutting the door firmly behind him. He didn't waste time. "Hargrove knows," he said. Monica's stomach twisted. "Knows what?" "That you've been helping us," Marcus confirmed, his expression grim. "We intercepted a message tonight. He's making moves fast. If he feels cornered, he might get desperate." Monica clenched her fists. "What does that mean for me?" Marcus exhaled sharply. "It means you need to be careful. He could try to intimidate you, discredit you, or worse." The warning sent a chill through her. She had known this fight wouldn't be easy, but the weight of it settled heavier on her shoulders. "What about the trial?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. Marcus pulled a flash drive from his pocket and placed it on the table. "This just came in from a whistleblower inside Hargrove's company," he said. "It contains records, real, verifiable financial transfers from Hargrove's shell companies, including Allegro Investments." Monica's breath hitched. This could prove everything," she whispered, staring at the drive. Marcus nodded. "It could, but it's dangerous. Hargrove won't go down without a fight." Monica picked up the flash drive, turning it over in her palm. She had been fighting for the truth from the beginning. Now she was closer than ever to exposing it. She looked up at Marcus, determination flashing in her eyes. "Then let's end this." The final blow. The next day, the courtroom was buzzing, the atmosphere charged with an unspoken anticipation. Hargrove sat at his table, composed but tense. His legal team was on edge. The jury was restless. Monica walked in, her shoulders square, her face calm. Today would be different. David Carrington stood, holding up a small flash drive. "Your Honor," he said, "the defense has new evidence." The prosecution objected immediately, but the judge raised a hand. "I'll allow it. Proceed." David moved to the screens in the courtroom. With a click, the contents of the drive filled the monitors. Bank transactions, wire transfers, money laundering trails, and Hargrove's name stamped across them all. A murmur rippled through the gallery. Hargrove's jaw tightened. For the first time since the trial began, he looked afraid. Then, the doors burst open. 2 FBI agents strode in, Marcus Reed leading them. He walked straight to the judge's bench, flashing a federal warrant. "Your Honor," Marcus said, "we're placing Stephen Hargrove under arrest." The room froze. A single stunned beat of silence. Then chaos, gasps, shouts, reporters scrambling. And in the middle of it all, Monica sat still, watching, waiting. As they pulled Hargrove to his feet, securing the cuffs around his wrists, he turned to glare at her. You think you've won? He snarled. Monica met his eyes, unshaken. I didn't have to beat you, she said quietly. The truth did. Hargrove was dragged from the courtroom, and for the first time since this nightmare began, Monica felt free, a threat in the shadows. Monica's pulse thumped in her ears as she watched Elaine Carter lay out the truth piece by piece. Hargrove's once unshakable confidence had begun to crumble, but Monica knew he wasn't finished. The threat she had received that morning was proof of that. David's voice cut through her thoughts. Miss Carter, did anyone ever pressure you to keep quiet about these irregularities? Elaine hesitated, then nodded. Yes. After Monica was arrested, I was told not to speak about anything I found, that it wasn't my concern. And who told you that? Elaine took a steady breath. A senior executive, under direct orders from Stephen Hargrove. A murmur spread through the gallery. David turned to the jury, his tone sharp. So, not only was Monica Johnson framed, but there was a concerted effort to silence anyone who got too close? Hargrove's lawyer jumped up. Objection, leading the witness. Sustained, Judge Ellison said, though her expression was growing more impatient. David stepped back, calm, controlled. No further questions, Your Honor. A sudden disruption. As Elaine stepped down, Monica's heart pounded. She felt like the walls were closing in, but she wasn't sure on who. Then just as David prepared to introduce the next witness, the courtroom doors slammed open. A collective gasp rippled through the room as 3 FBI agents strode inside. Marcus Reed led the way, his badge flashing as he moved toward the judge's bench. He handed her an envelope, thick, filled with documents. Judge Ellison opened it, her face hardening with every page she flipped through. Then she looked up. Mr. Hargrove, she said, her voice dangerously calm. Please rise. Hargrove froze. His lawyer stood quickly. Your Honor, what is the meaning of this? Ellison's gaze didn't waver. Mr. Hargrove, you are under federal investigation for fraud, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. Silence crashed over the room. Then, chaos. Gasps, whispers, reporters scrambling to capture the moment. Hargrove's face turned an ashen gray. This is ridiculous, he spat, anger finally cracking his polished veneer. I've done nothing wrong. Marcus Reed stepped forward. Stephen Hargrove, you are under arrest. The courtroom erupted. As the agents moved in, Hargrove's mask shattered. This is a setup, he roared, struggling as the cuffs snapped around his wrists. He turned, his eyes burning into Monica. You think you've won? Monica stood slowly, meeting his glare with a quiet strength she hadn't felt in weeks. I didn't need to win, she said. The truth did. A new beginning. Hours later, after the dust had settled, Monica sat in the courthouse hallway, her hands steady for the first time since this nightmare began. Marcus walked over, slipping his phone into his pocket. Hargrove's being processed now. The evidence was overwhelming. His accounts, the offshore money trails. It was enough to force a federal indictment. Monica nodded, exhaling deeply. And what about the threats? Marcus's expression darkened. We traced them back to one of Hargrove's men. He's in custody too. You and Tyler are safe now. Safe. The word felt foreign. For so long, Monica had lived in fear of losing everything, of the system crushing her. But now she had her life back. As she stepped outside, the afternoon sun bathed the courthouse steps in gold. She pulled out her phone and dialed. Mom! Tyler's voice lit up the line. Monica smiled, warmth filling her chest. It's over, sweetheart, she said, her voice light for the first time in months. We won. And for the first time in a long time, Monica felt free. Her phone pulled her back to reality. Another message. Last warning. Drop the case or suffer the consequences. A shiver ran down her spine. The weight of the threats pressed against her like an invisible force, squeezing the air from her lungs. She couldn't afford to break now. Taking a deep breath, she dialed Marcus. Tell me you found something, she said, skipping pleasantries. Marcus's voice was sharp. We traced the number. It's a burner phone, but we have reason to believe it's connected to one of Hargrove's men. We're working on it. Monica closed her eyes, her grip on the phone tightening. They mentioned Tyler. I can't. I can't risk him, Marcus. We won't let anything happen to him, Marcus reassured her. Trust me, we've increased surveillance. No one's getting close to him. But Monica, he paused, his voice serious. This means we're getting close. They wouldn't be this desperate if they weren't afraid. Desperate. The thought sparked something inside her. Hargrove was losing control, and that meant she couldn't stop now. She nodded as if Marcus could see her. Okay, she whispered. Let's finish this. The breaking point. The next morning, Monica stepped into the courtroom with new resolve. Marcus's words echoed in her mind. If they were this desperate, they were afraid, and fear meant weakness. David sat beside her, flipping through a folder of evidence. Are you ready? He asked under his breath. Monica nodded. More than ever. The trial resumed, and the prosecution was clearly feeling the pressure. Their questions were sharper, their attacks more aggressive, but Monica saw through it. Then it was time for Stephen Hargrove to take the stand. He walked up with his usual air of confidence, but Monica could see the cracks. His usual smirk was gone. David wasted no time. Mr. Hargrove, he said, pacing slowly. Let's talk about Allegro Investments. Hargrove's jaw tightened. I don't know what you're talking about, he said coolly. David smiled. Really? Because our forensic accountants, along with a few of your former employees, have traced over $5 million funneled through Allegro, an entity that, according to federal records, doesn't exist. The courtroom fell silent. Hargrove's lawyer jumped up. Objection. Sustained, Judge Ellison said, but there was curiosity in her expression now. Mr. Carrington, watch your phrasing. David nodded. Understood, Your Honor. He turned back to Hargrove, unfazed. So, Mr. Hargrove, David continued, his voice smooth, are you saying that this company, Allegro Investments, which received millions in payments from your accounts, is a figment of our imagination? Hargrove's fingers tapped against the wooden stand, a subtle, nervous tick. I don't recall, he said stiffly. David's smile widened. Then allow me to refresh your memory. He turned to the prosecutor's table, picking up a thick folder. These are emails between you and your senior financial team, emails where you directly authorize these payments. David handed copies to the clerk, who distributed them to the jury. Hargrove's face paled. Monica watched him closely. He was unraveling. And then, the courtroom doors flew open. Gasps rippled through the crowd as Marcus Reed walked in, flanked by 2 FBI agents. Judge Ellison sat up. Agent Reed, what is the meaning of this? Marcus stepped forward, pulling out a federal arrest warrant. Your Honor, we have new evidence. Stephen Hargrove is under federal indictment for wire fraud, tax evasion, and obstruction of justice. Stunned silence. Monica's breath caught. Hargrove's lawyer shot to his feet. This is an outrage. Save it, Marcus cut him off. We have bank records, shell company transactions, and sworn statements from multiple employees. Your client is done. Hargrove's mask shattered. You can't do this, he hissed. This is my company, my city. Marcus signaled to his agents. Mr. Hargrove, you are under arrest. The click of handcuffs echoed in the silent courtroom. As the agents pulled him away, Hargrove turned, his glare burning into Monica. This isn't over, he spat, but Monica simply stood tall, staring him down. No, she said, for you it is. Justice served hours later, as Monica sat outside the courthouse. The weight on her chest finally lifted. She had won. Tyler was safe. The truth was out. Marcus approached, hands in his pockets. You did good in there. Monica smiled, exhaustion and relief mixing together. We did. As she turned on her phone, messages flooded in. News headlines exploded with the story. Billionaire Stephen Hargrove arrested in financial scandal. Ex-employee cleared of charges. A text from Tyler popped up. Mom, we did it. Monica laughed softly, her heart full. For the first time in months, she felt free. To the jury, Monica watched the room with a quiet intensity. Every transaction log, every email chain, every falsified invoice told the same story. She wasn't the thief. She was the whistleblower. The tension in the room was suffocating. Hargrove's expression remained neutral, but Monica noticed the slight twitch in his jaw, the way his fingers tapped rhythmically against the table. a silent tell that he was losing control. David continued, clicking through a presentation slide that displayed an email chain between Hargrove and his CFO. In the highlighted section, Hargrove had written, "Move the funds under Allegro. Johnson is asking too many questions. Handle it." A murmur swept through the gallery. The jury leaned in. The prosecution scrambled. Hargrove's lawyer jumped up. "Your Honor, this is a blatant attempt to mislead the jury. The defense is pulling unrelated documents in a desperate attempt to shift blame." David cut in smoothly. "Desperate or exposing the truth?" Judge Ellison sighed. "The jury will decide that. Proceed." David turned back toward the jury. "Mr. Hargrove knew exactly what he was doing, and when my client started to uncover the truth, he framed her." A bead of sweat rolled down Hargrove's temple, and then the doors burst open. Gasps rippled through the courtroom as two federal agents stepped inside, badges raised. "Excuse the interruption, Your Honor," the taller agent said, his voice steady, commanding. "We have an arrest warrant for Stephen Hargrove on charges of wire fraud, obstruction of justice, and financial conspiracy." The courtroom froze. For a moment, no one moved. No one breathed. Then, like a slow-motion unraveling, Hargrove's world collapsed. His attorney spun around. "What is this? This is outrageous." The shorter agent silenced him with a glare. "We've been investigating Hargrove for months. Thanks to new evidence," he gestured toward the defense table. "We're bringing him in." Hargrove shot up from his seat. "You can't do this. This is my company, my empire." But the agents didn't hesitate. The sound of handcuffs locking around his wrists echoed through the silent room. Monica exhaled, her hands trembling as relief crashed over her. It was over. Justice served. As the court adjourned, Monica stepped outside, the crisp air filling her lungs. For the first time in months, she felt free. Reporters swarmed, cameras flashing. "Miss Johnson, how does it feel to be vindicated?" She paused, searching for the right words. "I never wanted to be here," she admitted. "I never wanted to fight this battle. But when you're faced with injustice, you have two choices: run or stand your ground." She met the cameras with a quiet, steady gaze. "I chose to stand." Somewhere in the crowd, Monica spotted Marcus Reed, watching from a distance. He gave her a small nod. She nodded back. Tyler's voice rang in her mind. "You're going to win, right?" Monica smiled. She already had. Pulled her coat tighter around her shoulders, her steps quickening as she walked toward her car. The cold air bit at her skin, but the real chill came from the uncertainty of what came next. Marcus caught up with her before she reached the parking lot. "Monica," he said in a low voice, his eyes scanning the area, always alert. "We need to talk." She hesitated. "Is it about the trial?" Marcus shook his head. "It's about Hargrove." Monica stiffened. "What about him?" "He's not the kind of man who takes losing lightly." Marcus glanced around before lowering his voice. "Now that his legal team is scrambling and the case is falling apart, we believe he might make a last-ditch effort to protect himself." A cold weight settled in Monica's stomach. "What does that mean?" Marcus exhaled sharply. "It means Hargrove still has connections, people willing to do his dirty work. We're keeping eyes on him, but I need you to be extra careful." Monica swallowed hard, nodding. "I will." Marcus studied her for a moment, then added, "And we've put extra surveillance on your son's school, just in case." Her breath hitched. "Tyler." "He's safe," Marcus reassured her quickly. "I promise you that. But if Hargrove's desperate, he could try anything. Stay vigilant." Monica gripped the strap of her purse tightly, anger replacing the fear creeping in. "He's already taken so much from me. I won't let him take anything else." Marcus gave a small nod of approval. "Good. Keep that fire, Monica. It's almost over." She wanted to believe that. She really did. Here's the final blow. The next day, the courtroom was packed tighter than ever. Word had spread that the FBI was involved, and the tension in the air was palpable. Hargrove's legal team tried to delay the inevitable, filing a last-minute motion to have Marcus's testimony thrown out, citing procedural concerns. But Judge Ellison wasn't having it. "Motion denied," she said, her tone clipped. "We will proceed." Hargrove's jaw tightened. His mask of confidence was slipping further, beads of sweat forming at his temple. David rose, buttoning his suit jacket. The defense calls Stephen Hargrove to the stand. A ripple of gas traveled through the courtroom. Monica turned sharply to David. "You're putting him on the stand?" she whispered. David gave her a subtle nod. "He's desperate. He'll crack." Reluctantly, Hargrove stood, adjusting his tie as he made his way to the witness stand. Under oath, he tried to maintain control, dodging questions, shifting blame. But David was relentless. "You claim you had no knowledge of Allegro Investments," David pressed, holding up the evidence. "Yet your name appears 16 times in direct authorizations for transactions linked to the company. Are you saying these were forged?" Hargrove shifted in his seat. "That's a misinterpretation," he muttered. David stepped closer. "A misinterpretation? Or the foundation of your entire scheme?" Hargrove clenched his jaw. "I built that company from the ground up. Do you think I'd—" Marcus, watching from the gallery, leaned forward slightly, his expression unreadable. David seized the moment. "Mr. Hargrove, did you or did you not instruct your employees to alter financial records and funnel money through Allegro Investments?" Hargrove's lips parted, his mind scrambling for a way out. Then, he made the mistake. "They were minor reallocations," he snapped. "Standard business practice." Silence. The words hung in the air. Judge Ellison's brow arched. "Mr. Hargrove, are you admitting to financial misrepresentation?" The courtroom exploded. His attorney jumped up. "Objection!" Judge Ellison slammed her gavel. "Overruled." Monica's breath caught. It was over. Justice delivered. Hargrove was arrested before he even left the courtroom. The jury didn't even need much time to deliberate. Monica was officially cleared of all charges within 48 hours. As she stepped out of the courthouse for the final time, Tyler ran into her arms. "You did it, Mom!" he beamed. She hugged him tightly, whispering, "We did it." Nearby, Marcus watched with a small, satisfied smile. David clapped her on the shoulder. "You were right about one thing," he said. "Arrogance always leaves a trail." Monica exhaled, looking up at the clear blue sky. For the first time in months, she felt free, watched as his fingers tapped anxiously against the polished wood of the defense table. He knew the walls were closing in. The prosecutor made one last-ditch effort to salvage the case, claiming that the new evidence was circumstantial. But David quickly countered, pointing out that financial trails don't lie. "Your Honor," David said, his voice steady, "we request an immediate ruling. Monica Johnson has been dragged through this process for far too long. The evidence speaks for itself." Judge Ellison exhaled, glancing at the jury, who were now clearly convinced of the truth. "I've seen enough," she said, her voice firm. "Miss Johnson, all charges against you are dismissed with prejudice." A wave of relief crashed over Monica. The gavel came down. Case closed. To the aftermath. The courtroom erupted into noise. Reporters scrambling, whispers turning into a roar of speculation. Hargrove remained seated, his face frozen in shock. But before he could even attempt an escape, 2 FBI agents entered the room. "Stephen Hargrove," Marcus's voice rang out, "you're under arrest for fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit financial crimes." The click of handcuffs was a sound Monica would never forget. As the agents let him out, Hargrove turned, his glare sharp and venomous. "You think this is over?" he sneered. Monica met his eyes, her expression unwavering. "Yes," she said, "I do. A new beginning." That night, Monica sat at her kitchen table, staring at a newspaper headline. CEO Stephen Hargrove arrested after explosive trial. She took a slow breath, the weight of months of fear and uncertainty lifting off her shoulders. Tyler peeked over her shoulder, grinning. "So does this mean we can finally go get ice cream without reporters following us?" Monica laughed, ruffling his hair. "Yes, baby, we can." As she looked out the window, the city lights shining in the distance, she realized something profound. She had fought, she had won, and no one would ever silence her again. Black woman takes stand, but courtroom freezes as FBI enters. The tension in the courtroom was stifling, the weight of weeks of testimony weighing down on everyone present. Naomi Carter sat at the defense table, her hands clasped tightly to her chest, watching Ethan Lancaster, the powerful real estate mogul, writhe under the mounting evidence against him. For weeks, Ethan had maintained a superior air, dismissing every incriminating testimony as a misunderstanding or a blatant lie. But today, things were different. The moment Naomi had been waiting for, the moment he could no longer hide, had arrived. During a brief recess, it happened. Ethan shot up from his chair, his feet scraping against the polished floor, his face red with anger. "This is ridiculous," he shouted, his voice echoing throughout the courtroom. "Do you think I'm going to sit here and let this farce continue?" Judge Carla Whitmore slammed her gavel down, her eyes narrowing. "Mr. Lancaster, restrain yourself, or I will hold you in contempt of court." But Ethan was beyond reason. He turned sharply toward Naomi, his face twisted with rage. "She's nothing, nobody. She doesn't even deserve to work for my company, let alone accuse me of anything." The courtroom erupted in gasps and whispers. For the first time in the trial, Naomi saw genuine panic in Ethan's eyes. He had always been careful with his words, calm and composed. But now, his arrogance had turned to rage, and rage had turned to carelessness. And in that moment, Naomi knew. He had just sealed his own fate. Judge Whitmore's voice cut through the chaos, stern and unwavering. "Mr. Lancaster," she said coldly, "you just made this court's decision so much easier." Naomi's heart pounded in her chest as the jury returned to the room, their expressions unreadable. She gripped the edge of the table, holding her breath. The foreman stood, holding a folded piece of paper. "In the case of the state of New York versus Naomi Carter, we find the defendant not guilty." Naomi gasped, the words hitting her like a tidal wave. For a moment, time froze. Then relief flooded her, her vision blurred with tears. David Langston, her defense attorney, squeezed her shoulder, his face beaming with quiet triumph. Judge Whitmore turned to the prosecution, his expression determined. "Given the overwhelming evidence of wrongdoing, this court will now open a formal federal investigation into Ethan Lancaster's financial activities. This case is adjourned." The gavel rang out with a final statement that echoed throughout the packed courtroom. Ethan Lancaster sat silently, his face pale, as whispers filled the courtroom. Justice had been served. Aftermath, victory was decided. As reporters crowded the courthouse steps, Naomi slipped into a side room with FBI agent Marcus Reed. He handed her a small envelope. "What is this?" she asked, her voice hoarse with emotion. Marcus nodded in satisfaction. "It's official. Lancaster's assets have been frozen. He is under federal investigation and will face multiple charges of fraud, embezzlement, and money laundering." Naomi's fingers trembled as she opened the document inside. It was true. Finally, it was over. She looked up at Marcus, her voice calm, though tears were still streaming down her face. "Thank you," she whispered. Marcus smiled weakly. "You deserved it, and today you proved something, to everyone in that courtroom, and beyond." A few weeks later, a new beginning. The days following the decade-long trial were a jumble of news and interviews, but life finally began to settle down. One evening, Naomi curled up on the couch, her 10-year-old son Elijah lying next to her, watching his favorite cartoon. The nightmare was over. Her name had been cleared. Her life was her own again. A knock on the door startled her. When she opened the door, she saw David Langston standing there, a big smile on his face and a bottle of champagne in his hand. "I think we can celebrate properly," he said, stepping inside. Naomi smiled, relieved, free, unburdened for the first time in months. "I think we deserve it." As they raised their glasses to toast her freedom and Ethan Lancaster's downfall, Naomi felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. She had fought the impossible, she had stood her ground, and she had won. Naomi Carter's story is more than just a thrilling courtroom tale. It's also a powerful reflection of the real-world struggles many people face every day. Whether it's corporate corruption, workplace discrimination, or being wrongly accused, her journey highlights some important lessons we can all apply to our own lives. 1. Stand your ground, even when the odds are against you. Naomi was framed by a powerful billionaire who thought his wealth and influence would protect him. But instead of backing down, she fought for the truth, even when the system seemed stacked against her. In real life, there will always be people who will try to silence you, especially when you challenge injustice. Don't let fear stop you from standing up for what's right. The truth will always be powerful, even when it feels like no one is listening. 2. Corruption thrives in silence. Speak up. If Naomi had kept quiet about the financial fraud she uncovered, Ethan Lancaster would have continued to steal without consequences. The greatest weapon against corruption is exposure, and that's exactly what changed everything in this case. In real life, if you see something wrong, whether it's in your workplace, in your community, or in society, don't be afraid to speak up. Report injustices, seek support, and use your voice to draw attention to wrongdoing. 3. The right allies can change things Naomi didn't win alone. She had David Langston fighting in court, FBI agent Marcus Reed uncovering evidence, and even a former employee coming forward to reveal the truth. Without these allies, justice may never be served. In real life, find people who believe in justice, integrity, and accountability. Whether it's lawyers, activists, colleagues, or even social media communities, having the right people by your side can turn an impossible fight into a winnable one. Power doesn't always mean invincibility. Ethan Lancaster thought his money and connections made him invincible. He used his influence to control the narrative, manipulate the system, and intimidate people into silence. But in the end, his arrogance was his downfall. In real life, no one is above accountability. History has proven time and time again that even the most powerful figures can crumble when the truth comes to light. If you're dealing with someone who's abusing their power, don't lose hope. Their downfall may be closer than they think. 5. Justice takes time. But it's worth fighting, for Naomi's journey hasn't been easy. She's faced betrayal, threats, and sleepless nights, wondering if she'll ever clear her name. But she keeps moving forward, and in the end, she not only proves her innocence, but also helps expose a corrupt system. In real life, justice doesn't come immediately. It takes patience, resilience, and courage. Whether you're fighting for yourself or for someone else, be strong, persevere, and don't let setbacks define your journey. Your voice matters. Your fight matters. Don't let injustice go unchecked. Stand up for what's right and inspire others to do the same. Join the conversation. Leave a comment below. Which lesson from Naomi's story resonates with you the most? Have you ever been faced with a worse situation where it was difficult to stand up for yourself? And don't forget to like this video if you believe in truth over corruption. Subscribe for more powerful, true stories. Share this story, because you never know who needs to hear it today. There will be more great stories coming soon. Stay tuned.